Back to Fabian.
I want to renew my question from yesterday.
Yeah.
How do I soften up? How do I learn to cry?
All right. Shall we focus on that for the last 10 minutes? To stop our fight with God, we've got to become emotionally softer, don't we? Like more sensitive emotionally. Right. So let's not just call it crying, because it requires more than just crying. Crying is a part of releasing the error, but there's other things you're going to need. You need to just be sensitive emotionally. You need to feel like I can feel what each person's feeling. And if I can feel what each person's feeling, then if I want to love them, I know how to love them. But also, if I want to deal with some truth with them, I know what truths to share. Even just from my own life, if I can feel what all of you are feeling, I know I shouldn't respond to that person because that person's angry. I shouldn't deal with this person because that person, wants an addiction met. I need to do, this person's sincere, so I need to, spend more time with that person. I'll be able to work out a lot of things in my life if I'm sensitive. So
we're talking about sensitivity to others, but really before that, we just need to be sensitive to ourselves in situations.
Yeah, well, my point is that you can't be sensitive to others unless you're sensitive to yourself. So our goal is, let's say this is our goal, emotionally sensitive.
And are we saying within that we can feel?
Well, in that we can feel our own feelings, we can feel other people's feelings, we know what those feelings are, we can identify the feelings, we feel the nuances of feelings, the specific little details of that feeling or where that feeling came from. There's a lot in being emotionally sensitive. It's really beneficial, actually. Every celestial spirit is excellent with emotional sensitivity. They know exactly what's going on, right? So that's our goal. God's goal is for you to become that. All right? God knows you become emotionally sensitive. You're going to be very sensitive about what's not loving anymore. And you're going to be very sensitive about what's truthful and what's not truthful anymore. You'll be able to determine and feel the difference between truth and untruth. You'll be able to feel the difference between love and what's not love. You'll be able to feel the difference between what's humble and what's not humble. You'll be able to feel the difference between faith and imagination, which is not faith, but it's what most people nowadays call faith. They call imagination faith. They imagine things are going to happen and they call that faith, and you need to have faith. No, in their religion you need to have imagination because it's nothing to do with reality. It's faith. That's not faith. So when you're emotionally sensitive, you can tell the difference between each thing. And the big things you can tell the difference between the most because you're more sensitive. And then the smaller the thing is, you feel the nuances of the thing. You can feel the little tiny parts of the thing. So for example, if Mary's upset, I can feel why she's upset, where her upset comes from, who she's upset with, how she's upset, why she feels upset, whether it's an injury or a valid reason, and I can feel all that without asking her. Right? Now that's great, because that means Mary doesn't have to yabber at me to tell me how she feels. Right? And she can have, after a while, she has some confidence, haven't you? Like over the years, you've gained confidence that, he already knows what I'm feeling, even sometimes before I'm feeling it. Right? That's because of emotional sensitivity. This is a blessing in your life. The big problem that we have on earth is that we're treating this as if it's a sickness, a curse. A curse, a sickness. We think that is a sickness. Yeah? We think it's a curse or a sickness. The sin tells us that. And so what do we try to do with that? The actions we take are suppressive. We're trying to suppress. So your question, Fabian, was, how do I get more emotionally sensitive? Well, obviously, the first thing we need to do is stop our attempts to suppress. That's the suppression starts within you. Does that make sense? You've learnt it. You've been educated to do it over the years. And if you're a man, you've been educated to do it even more than a woman, probably. Because there's a belief about men that you've got to be stoic and you've got to be intellectually driven and you've got to have control of your emotions all the time. And fathers in particular get pretty harsh on their sons when they don't, right? So men generally have even more suppression than women as a result of that. So we become emotionally insensitive is what we've become. Now, to reverse that, can you see, I must first, to reverse anything, what do I need to reverse anything? I need a desire. Yeah. Now, can you see, if I've got a whole heap of fears about being emotionally sensitive, it's going to be very hard, isn't it, to have a desire. Remember yesterday we drew a scale. One of them was fear and the other was desire. Remember that? And we said if your fear is up there about a thing and your desire is there, you know, in other words, your fear is greater than your desire, are you going to deal with anything? And I think it was in the conversation with you and you told me, no, you're not going to deal with it, right? So if my fear is up there and my desire is down here about being emotionally sensitive, I'm not going to let myself become emotionally sensitive. I'm going to have to firstly work on my fears. So my desire will have to first work on my fears to lessen my fears. And to lessen fear, the only way to lessen fear is to release it by feeling it. So I'm going to have to feel fear. So that's the very first thing. I'm going to have to exercise a desire to feel fear, so that, and in particular, the fear of being emotionally sensitive. In 2016, I think, we did a series of assistance groups, and I think it was the second one, where we talked about the global problem on Earth. And the global problem on Earth is being terrified of that. Terrified of that state. Being emotionally open, having emotion, is a terrifying thing for most people on Earth. And there's a lot of reasons for it, and to be honest, you could be talking for a week about the reasons, because there's all family, society, education, there's all sorts of reasons. But it doesn't really matter what the reasons are, really. What matters is you reverse it, right? That you allow yourself to see this is one of God's goals with you, because God knows if you're more emotionally sensitive, you'll also be more sensitive to love. You'll also be more sensitive to truth. You'll not be numb anymore. You're not zoning out anymore. You're not intellectually driven anymore. You honour emotion. You value it. At the moment on Earth, emotions are not valued. They are suppressed through medication. They are not valued, right? So half of the medical industry is just about the suppression of emotion. Most of the drug industry is about the suppression of emotion. Like we are now prepared to go to the lengths of modifying our own DNA in order to suppress emotion. That's how extreme our desire to to suppress emotion is. So we're going to have to develop a desire to do the opposite of that. Now, that you can see is going to be a work in progress, isn't it? You can see that it's going to take some pretty major effort to reverse the trend, firstly in ourselves. And so my feelings are, deal with the reasons why you're so afraid of being emotionally sensitive. Deal with the feelings you have about why. Sensitivity to emotion feels so terrifying to you. Now, you will find in those fears there will be things like, I've been taught that I can't handle emotion. I've been taught to believe from my own childhood that if I have emotion, it's the very worst thing you could have. Any sad emotion, any negative emotion is the very worst thing you could do. I've been taught that it's silly, stupid to have emotion. I've been taught that it's weakness to have emotion. I've been taught that the better course of action is to suppress the emotion as a proof of my power over emotion. I am taught that when I have emotion, I am not powerful. I am weak. Now, all of these teachings, which all of us have had at some point, and usually in our childhood, have caused us to detune from a soul quality which is emotional sensitivity. And it's one of the primary soul qualities that God designed us with and wanted us to develop. Right? And in fact, so much so that the seventh sphere of the spirit world is all about getting rid of the mind completely and just living in your emotion. That's how far God wants us to go with it. He wants us to go to the stage where we're no longer defining and living our life by our mind, but our feelings define and control everything we do. And in fact, you cannot enter the eighth sphere of the spirit world unless you've done that. You cannot become at one with God unless you've done it. That's how strongly God wants you to be emotionally sensitive, right? So this should become a goal if I want to grow spiritually. This should be one of my goals. And what I feel with God's love is this, that the more of God's love I receive, it sort of stretches me emotionally. My capacity to experience emotion grows. So there's emotions that if I felt them in my, say, 20s, emotions that I've had recently, that if I felt them in my 20s, I would have died from them. Because I didn't have the emotional capacity to even cope with them. Yep. But now I can handle intense emotion. Right? And it's not only bad emotion, it's also intense good emotion. Yeah, that's the beauty of it, is that you allow a sensitivity. It's not just sensitivity to what's bad, it's also sensitivity to what's good. So, for instance, your sexual sensitivity improves, your happy sensitivities improve, all these other sensitivities improve as a result of releasing and becoming more emotionally sensitive.
I know you're about to wrap up, so I just want to add some practical things
Yep.
to this growing the desire and also getting rid of the fear.
Yep.
I would say things that have helped me is staying very close to truth, like really seeking truth, and praying even when... Sort of like praying even when... We know, now prayer is a heartfelt longing, don't you? But it's sometimes when you start to pray, like, well, I don't know if this is really heartfelt because I'm not yet sensitive enough. So, but it's almost like getting into that practice of praying to soften yourself emotionally. It's like growing in your faith. So, and then the third thing I was going to say is becoming very kind to yourself. A lot of the reasons we've become emotionally insensitive is because people weren't kind to us when we were emotional. And so I've had to learn to be very kind and gentle with myself around my emotions. The way that I sort of came at things initially was, well, right, I can see the truth is I've got to be emotional. I'm going to make myself emotional in the same way that people got me to do things when I was a kid, which is very sort of kind of harsh, and you've got to force yourself, and that never worked. I had to learn to be very kind to myself, and it's almost like then I created almost a space inside of me that felt safer to have emotions, because before then I was sort of living with the messages I'd had in my childhood. I'd internalized them towards my emotional self, and then I couldn't feel anything, and I knew I should be feeling something. And so really seeking more of God's truth, praying to God even when I wasn't receiving answers, if you like, I wasn't receiving God's love, but being in a prayerful state and learning to be kind and compassionate to myself and exercising that even when it felt uncomfortable, even when I felt like, no, I should be punishing myself. I'm not living up to what I should be, really catching myself in those moments and being kind and compassionate. That helped me to become more emotionally sensitive. Yeah.
And now other practical things, remove yourself from environments that stop you from feeling. So in other words, create a lifestyle that allows you to feel. So if you've got a job that shuts you down for 9 hours of the day and it doesn't let you feel, then you need to do something about that, take some action about that, right? So that you can feel. There's jobs like what I find, like I can be working outside in the environment, doing different jobs, and I can cry all day if I want, right? So that would be a better job than the job I used to have, which was computing systems, hardware and software engineering. And man, I was like so intellectual. It was like, working in front of this computer, and by the time, 10 hours had gone past or 12 hours goes past, didn't have an emotion at all. Just do, get it done, driving yourself, After a while, I realised I can't do this anymore. I'm earning plenty of cash and everything, which is just an addiction anyway, and I'm earning all this money and whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm numbing my soul. I'm feeling like I'm numbing my soul, and so you got to change that. You got to choose to, if you have to sacrifice some funds for the result of changing your life, then sacrifice your funds and change your life. If you've got to sell a house and move to a different location to save your life, then do that. Make a choice to create an atmosphere. Yeah,
it's sort of like you're saying, you almost making that your job for a while.
Yeah.
You're developing something that's going to serve you eternally. But it's going to take some effort. I think when I first met Jesus again, I was like, right, well, you just feel. Just do it, and there's no compassion for yourself in that process. But also there's this magical idea that you can just flick a switch. And that's not how soul progression works. You really need to understand it's going to be a process, that you're going to have to be dedicated and diligent and consistent. And part of the diligence is being diligently kind to yourself and diligently making space for yourself and diligently praying and those things. Yeah.
And also start questioning what you feel are priorities in your life. One necessary priority in your life is to look after yourself. So that means that you should at least earn enough money for you to live on, if that's what you need to live. You need to at least create a space where you can live and you can, and also a space where you can cry, hopefully, right? A space where you can actually progress and work through things. You need to create that space. You need to be responsible for yourself in life. That is a part of you learning God's way, is to become a self-responsible being. So that's what you need to do. But you don't need to have millions of dollars at your disposal. You don't need to even have hundreds of thousands of dollars at your disposal in order to do that. There's so many things you can do to make your life better so you can feel, right? Put a priority on opening your heart to feeling and opening your heart to God, which is all about feeling God and allowing God's feelings to enter you. Put a priority on that. So that's going to require potentially some adjustments in your life, maybe an adjustment in your job, maybe some trust and faith that if you put some priority in your life towards those goals, that it will benefit you in the long run. See, what I found was by the time I was 33, so I was an electronics engineer, software programmer, hardware engineer, networking engineer. I was doing that from the time I was 17 years of old to the time I was 33. And then I continued doing that even after I started progressing emotionally until I was 40. But the last 7 years of it were very difficult because it zoned me out of what I was trying to do. And I didn't realise it. I was trying to build an empire at the time. When I say an empire, it was just a little empire. I wasn't interested in ruling Austria or something. It was more like It was more like an empire of 10 or 15 houses, income coming in, so didn't have to work, that kind of thing. That was my motivation and my goal. And during that phase, that 7-year phase when I started getting my priorities right, I sold off all these properties. I eventually got no profit from them because of how I sold them, because I knew I just had to quit everything, like fire sale everything, and sort out my life, fire sale everything, sort it all out. So by the time I was 40, I was ready to face some substantial emotional issues in me by that stage, even though when I was 33 I was completely numb. And I was completely numb. Like, if you had to ask me what I was feeling, I would not have been able to tell you what I was feeling for almost all the time. I wouldn't have been able to tell you what I was feeling. And I was certainly numb to other people too. I didn't know what they were feeling. In fact, most of the time, I was totally confused as to why people were doing what they were doing. Had no idea. I used to sit down and try to work out what they were doing and why. During that period of time, some people wanted to have a business with me, and I went into business with them. I was a director of the business, and they went through all of this stuff, and they eventually stole the whole business from me, right? And not only stole the whole business, but all of the things I bought in the business before they came a part of the business, they stole all of that as well. And I was totally confused as to why. I didn't know they were capable of doing it. But see, if I was emotionally sensitive, I would have known. Would have known straight away. Now I know straight away. As soon as a person comes on and says they want to help, I go, you can't help me. You've got this issue, that issue, this issue, that issue. You can't help us. And back then, I was just like hopeful. I used to hope in the good of everything, and most things turned out bad because I was emotionally insensitive. Right? So these are the drawbacks of not having that sensitivity that I've personally experienced, and you're already personally experiencing too in your life without sometimes recognising it. And if you become emotionally sensitive, which is God's goal, because God wants eventually that you're so emotionally sensitive that you feel God, and that you feel God wants to give you love, and that you stop your fight with God, and instead you're so emotionally sensitive that you want God's feelings inside of you. That's his goal, to have his feelings inside of you based on what you want, not just what he wants. And to do that, that's going to not only help you be emotionally sensitive, but it's going to expand your sensitivity beyond the capacity of any human, and your emotional sensitivity will become godlike, because there's a part of God in you. Right? So that's God's goal for you. And going through that process, as Mary said, requires some fundamental things. You see how a lot of things get back to 4 things: humility, truth, faith, and love. 4 things. Of course, you could add a 5th, and that's action. Taking action, loving action.